Good afternoon. Could I kindly ask you all to put your phones on silent mode? I'm Sophia Madura, the Chief Programs Officer, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this second installment of Tomorrow's Breakthroughs Today in partnership with the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, and made possible thanks to the very generous support of Tom and Heidi McWilliams. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Heidi. We also have a number of ADDF board members here today. Would you kindly raise your hands, those of you who are here? Right, look at that. Yeah, lots of you here. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for everything you do. The Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation was founded, as many of you know, in 1998 by Leonard and Ronald Lauder, and the organization is dedicated to developing the therapeutics and the biomarkers that prevent, treat, and cure Alzheimer's and related dementias. Today's lecture features a conversation between two notable leaders in the field, Dr. Laura Nisenbaum and Dr. Phyllis Ferrell. Dr. Nisenbaum is a proven scientific leader with 30 years of experience both in the biotech industry and in academia. And as executive director of the drug development at ADDF, she oversees all of the scientific affairs, the biomarker development, and the aging and Alzheimer's prevention team. So big responsibilities there. Before joining ADDF, she led the biomarker strategy at Diagnostic Pathway Group and spent 20 years at Eli Lilly in the early phase clinical development. Over the years, she has contributed to the discovery and development of more than 15 novel therapeutics. She's brought 3 molecules. When I studied, I thought they were just molecules were there. I didn't know you could invent them. But she's brought 3 molecules for FDA approval and has authored over 35 publications in scientific journals. Dr. Phyllis Ferrell was also at Eli Lilly, where she spent 3 decades as a life sciences executive and held leadership roles from medical affairs and development to business and strategy. In 2011, she took on a leadership role for the Alzheimer's Therapeutics and Diagnosis in Lilly, and since that moment, decided to become and has remained a relentless advocate for patients and families living with Alzheimer's. In 2020, she was placed on as an executive on loan to the World Economic Forum Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, where she's served as the visionary leader of their healthcare preparedness program. She's also a strategic reviewer for ADDF, a current member of the World Dementia Council, and on the advisory committee of the Milken Institute Center for the Future of Aging. I think you'll agree that the future of detecting and preventing Alzheimer's only looks brighter with these 2 formidable women at the forefront. At the end of the lecture, those of you who want to talk to the speakers or to some of the ADDF members who are here, feel free to join them at the front of the stage. And now, please welcome Dr. Nisenbaum and Dr. Ferrell to the stage.
Thank you, Sophia. It is lovely to see everybody here this afternoon for what I know will be a very exciting and engaging discussion with my colleague, Phyllis Ferrell. And just want to say that we're thrilled to be here as ADDF to have this conversation. As Sophia mentioned, that ADDF has been in existence for 26 years, and we really see that this is an incredibly exciting time and, quite frankly, unprecedented in research and drug development related to Alzheimer's disease. So we are really at a turning point for the field. And at ADDF, we have been helping to catalyze the research, both related to drugs as well as biomarkers and diagnostics. We've been very proud to help catalyze and bring to the market one of the biomarkers and diagnostics that Phyllis actually participated in, the very first amyloid PET scan, Amyvid, as well as one of the first blood tests that has come to the market. And so as we look at this incredibly exciting time where we are now, my first question to you, Phyllis, is where do you see the landscape for Alzheimer's research, and where do you see the challenges?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a topic that I love to discuss, and I love to discuss with people that are passionate about brain health as well. And when you say, can you do it with your friend Laura, it's even better. We were talking about how this is exactly the conversation we would have if we were having a glass of wine together. So it's a pleasure to be able to do it with all of you. About 15 years ago, I was on the business side at Eli Lilly and Company, and they tapped me to come lead our late-stage drug development team for Alzheimer's disease. At the time, I didn't know much about Alzheimer's disease or brain health. But about 6 months later, my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And so I lived a personal and professional diagnostic journey and care journey that made me very passionate about the state of the field. And I was really frustrated because if you read the headlines, what you've heard over the last 10, 15 years is failure, failure, failure. You've probably seen this, right? Another drug study failed, another drug study failed. And here I was working with this amazing team of scientists, and none of them saw negative studies as failures. Because if you're a scientist, a negative study is something to learn from. And actually, they're definitively a way to learn. And so what I'm really excited about is what the lay community and the lay press might have seen as failures, scientists saw as progress. And here we are, where we've basically stepped on top of those studies to a place where we now have some of the first disease-modifying therapies available. Now, are these the end of the journey? By no means. But are these the beginning of the end? Yes. So it's really a place of hope for me. And I've recently retired from Lilly and have become an independent advisor in this space. And one of the reasons I chose to do that, and Laura has seen this at ADDF, is we're on the front of an innovation curve that's just unbelievable in terms of the amount of science that we now understand around the biology, the amount of investment that's coming into the space. And so I don't think there's a more exciting time to be working in Alzheimer's disease, and it's really great.
And what some of you may not know is that I actually first met Phyllis when I also worked at Lilly.
Yeah.
And we worked on some of the same teams. There was a drug, one of the earlier drugs that was in development, one of the first monoclonal antibodies, solanezumab. And this was a team that we worked on together, and we saw, some progress, but also the failures. And then you began some work that actually led or was the starting point for one of the drugs that is really at the cusp of being able to be brought forward to the market and commercialized. This is Lilly's donanemab drug that you may have heard about. We're waiting to hear from the FDA any day now.
Any day.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the work that you did at Lilly that helped lead to some of the development of donanemab and the other aspects related to Alzheimer's drug and diagnostics.
Yeah, I think it's actually a really important journey, especially for those of you that are closely following the science, because one of the things that was always a challenge in Alzheimer's disease is that you are not just studying the drug, you are also studying the trial design at the same time. So because cognition was the primary endpoint for the studies, meaning, did your memory and scores on these cognitive tests change over time? It was highly variable and very, very slow. So what was happening is the science was evolving at the same, well, actually faster than the studies were evolving. And so what was happening, for example, with solanezumab, the first two studies, which were called Expedition 1 and Expedition 2, not super creative, we found out later when we looked back at those studies that 25% of that population didn't have amyloid. And we were studying an anti-amyloid drug. But at the time, we didn't have Amyvid available yet. So Amyvid is the very first imaging agent and the gold standard that looks at amyloid in the brain. And so why is this important? Well, at the time we were starting those studies, which doesn't seem that long ago now, we actually could not see amyloid in a human brain unless someone volunteered for brain biopsy. So you didn't, who's volunteering for brain biopsy, right? So what was happening was you didn't know that someone actually definitively had Alzheimer's disease until autopsy. So when all of a sudden then, thank you ADDF for putting in some of the first funding for Amyvid, we now could actually take an injection with a ligand that bound to this amyloid plaque in the brain and take a scan, and it would light up. And we then found that we were treating this disease very, very late. What we found out was the plaque in the brain actually built 10 to 20 years before symptoms. So what we thought is Alzheimer's disease, and we were thinking had this mental model, is kind of like stage 4 cancer. Who wants a stage 4 cancer diagnosis when you can get a stage 1 cancer diagnosis, right? And so we were treating this disease very, very late. And this was one of the things that we learned through the solanezumab program. Our first 2 phase 3 studies, we actually weren't testing for amyloid as part of the inclusion criteria into the study. And we found out that a large number of the patient population didn't actually have Alzheimer's disease. And so one of the things that happened with donanemab, which is the study that's ongoing now, is you actually have to have both of the hallmark pathologies of the disease. So amyloid pathology, which is the plaque that's outside the cells, and tau pathology, which is the tangles that are inside the cells. And so those two pathologies now we can see in images. Amyvid and Tauvid are the two imaging agents. Hopefully we'll talk about blood in a little bit, and we're going to find a way to make this easier than imaging. But I think that's really important when you think about how we've come along scientifically, is that those solanezumab was so near and dear to my heart, and yet those studies are the things that gave us what we know now to be able to find drugs like donanemab and Leqembi.
That's right. And in fact, prior to coming to ADDF, I was working at Biogen, and you may know that Biogen did have a drug that came to market. It had its difficulties, but one of the really innovative things was being able to use Amyvid to be able to select the patients so that we could include the right patients in more of a precision medicine approach, that is, finding those people for whom the drug will actually help. So I think that as we look forward, something else that Phyllis and I have in common.
Before we leave Amyvid, I just have to tell one other story. So we were very lucky, blessed at Lilly that ADDF. So this is kind of what ADDF does. They take bets on things before pharma's going to. Right? Mm-hmm. And that's really important because there's this kind of valley of death that sometimes innovation goes through if it can't get over into the proof of concept data where big pharma is willing to acquire it. So we're very lucky that ADDF, actually the whole field took a bet on a gentleman by the name of Dan Skrovansky, who's now the chief scientific officer at Lilly, invested in Amyvid, and then Amyvid actually was acquired. The whole company was acquired by Lilly. But the story I want to tell you is Amyvid is commercially available. So We've had some arm wrestling with Medicare, but we're working through ways to get it paid for. But one of the things what happened when people actually saw a scan of their brain, right? So they actually saw a picture of their brain. They realized Alzheimer's was real. It's a real disease. You're not crazy. You're not weak. Think about the mental illness stigma, right, that happens with brain disease. And it was this really, really important thing for patients to actually be able to see a picture, or in the case of any other biomarker, see a definitive, measurable, objective result that said there's something really wrong here. And doctors became more confident because doctors now weren't kind of guessing at what was going on. They had a real picture, a real image, and they could say, this is what's going on. And I think that's so important to start talking about brain health and the pathology in the brain as something, something real, not something to hide.
And it's exactly that topic that I was going to then come back to ask you about. So we know that it's going to require tools and tests to be able to see those different biomarkers and different pathologies in the brain. And while ADDF had been for 20 years very focused on the development of the drugs, we recognized that biomarkers will be essential. And so actually Phyllis played a very important role for ADDF in that she also recognized this key necessity. But it's not enough to recognize that there is a gap or a need. We need to be able to find a way to bring action to that issue. And Phyllis, in fact, played a pivotal role in helping ADDF to develop something that we call the Diagnostic Accelerator. So this is a fund that can be used to help companies develop these key biomarkers and diagnostics. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about that, Phyllis.
Yeah, it's actually kind of an interesting history lesson. Some of you might remember the name Prime Minister David Cameron. He was the Prime Minister in the UK and actually had what was then the G8 presidency in 2013, right? Because this was before Russia invaded Crimea. And so he launched the Global Action Against Dementia when he had that G8 presidency in 2013. And that created a cascade of activities. But one thing it created was something called the Dementia Discovery Fund, which was a venture capital fund. So for those of you that are business people, this is traditional venture capital. The only thing that was really unique about it was that the government in the UK actually put money into the fund. So it allowed a commingling of public and private funding, which is very unusual. So we were all very excited about this. Investment in Alzheimer's was great. This was kicked off in 2014. Well, at the time I was working on that fund, I called the VC firm and said, okay, we need to do this for diagnostics. And they're like, great idea, but we won't do it because there isn't a capital market for diagnostics similar to therapeutics. So once again, y'all business people understand that capital markets drive investment, right? They drive innovation. And I knew, having been on the research side, that you couldn't have the therapies without having the diagnostics that matched the right people to the therapies. And at the time, I had been working with Bill Gates's private office. At the time, he hadn't announced it, but he's announced it since. Bill lost his father to Alzheimer's disease. And they were trying to find out, Gates Ventures, so this is not the foundation, this is his private office, were trying to determine where the gaps were that they could come in and fix something. And I went, ooh, pick me. I found a gap. I said, we need investments in diagnostics, and the capital market won't drive this. And they said, well, what if we put together a venture fund that's a philanthropic venture fund? So what does this mean? It means that just like if you're a company getting money from a VC, it looks the same, right? So you get your VC money, you go sell something, you give money back to the venture capital firm. But the donors don't get a return. Any return evergreens the fund for more investment. And they said, this is a great idea, Phyllis, but who can help us do this? And I said, I know somebody. And so it was really fun because I'd already worked with a lot of the folks at ADDF. I knew what they were already doing on the therapeutic side. And so we approached them and we said, let's do this diagnostics accelerator. Let's find a way to invest in the diagnostics. And Bill brought some of his high net worth friends together with the Lauder family, and they created what's just taken off like a rocket in terms of the diagnostics accelerator. And it's providing a really, really important thing for the field that the capital markets weren't driving, but patients and science needed it. And now we're having a lot of success in biomarkers, and I think ADDF, the diagnostics accelerators, had invested in most of the ones that are being launched. So sorry for a little bit of the history story, but I thought you all might be interested in the connection back to Prime Minister Cameron.
And so I know that you have been working on understanding what the needs are of the healthcare system. Obviously, diagnostics are part of that, but just developing diagnostics is not sufficient.
Right.
So can you tell me a little bit about how you see the importance of detection with these diagnostics and where that fits into the healthcare system?
Right. So Sophia mentioned this. The last 3 years that I was at Lilly, I was actually on secondment to the World Economic Forum. And the reason for that is the World Economic Forum is the place that creates these large global health initiatives. Some of you might have heard of COVAX during the COVID time. So Gavi and CEPI are these two very large global health initiatives that look at immunization and communicable disease. They were both started by the World Economic Forum. Once again, that's the place where the public sector and the private sector are allowed to work together. And so you're going to hear this theme, right? When the public sector and the private sector can work together, we make magic happen. But one of the reasons that we had petitioned the World Economic Forum is we'd been really successful getting the World Health Organization and the United Nations and the G7 and the G20 and the OECD to all put dementia and Alzheimer's on their agenda. But nothing was getting off paper and actually changing anything for a patient. And it was driving me crazy. I told you I was living this, right, in my own family. We went through I lost my father in 2017. He had 6 diagnoses. I never got him an Amyvid scan, even though I was responsible for it, because the health system was a barrier. And so we had really worked with the World Economic Forum. And one of the things that we determined is you really need to have early detection of this disease. So, right, nobody wants a stage 4 cancer diagnosis. If you get a stage 1, there's so many degrees of freedom for you, right? So many more options and opportunities. And now these disease-modifying therapies, they don't reverse the disease. They slow the progression. So the earlier you catch it, the more opportunity, the more time you have to slow the progression. But this wasn't happening. So we started kind of peeling back the onion. And I'm going to give you some stats that are U.S. So you guys have probably heard of the annual wellness visit, right? The annual Medicare wellness visit is a legislative right for every single person in this country over 65. Every single person in this country over 65 has a legislative right to an annual wellness visit. As part of that annual wellness visit, there is a requirement to do a cognitive assessment. So now, everyone over the age of 65 has a legislative right to the annual wellness visit and a legislative right to a cognitive assessment. Do you know what percentage of people in the United States over 65 get a standardized cognitive assessment? 4%. 4% of Americans over the age of 65 get their legislative right to a cognitive assessment. And so what I see then is I see a whole bunch of people who, now, if you don't want to know, fine, don't know. But there's a whole lot of people who actually are missing out on the opportunity to enroll in a clinical trial, to take a disease-modifying therapy, to understand what their lifestyle and behavior changes might be that could make their brain more resilient. And so we got very, very active in this health system preparedness, right? Step 1, know your baseline. Everyone over 50 should know their baseline, right? And oh, by the way, if everybody gets a cognitive assessment, then the stigma goes down, right? There's no stigma when someone takes your blood pressure at the doctor. Everyone does it, right? There's no stigma when you get your fasting blood glucose done or your cholesterol numbers. Everybody gets it. Let's just do the checkup from the neck up. It's the most important organ in our brain, in our body, and we don't take care of it. So that's number one. So number one is the cognitive assessment. Then, if something's wrong, you need to find out what's wrong. What's causing it? A lot of the symptoms that look like Alzheimer's disease are something else. Mm-hmm. They could be concomitant medications. They could be geriatric depression, looks a lot like Alzheimer's disease, and it is a very treatable thing. And then you've got different types of cognitive impairment. FTD, for example, is one where Aricept is contraindicated. So you should not be giving someone with FTD Aricept. But if you don't actually do that second step, which is what's causing the symptoms, then you don't know what's really going on. So those two steps are the two things that I would be thrilled to see from a healthcare system preparedness. And that's before you ever get to a drug. That should be happening with or without a disease-modifying therapy.
So you and I actually, just before this, we're talking about what everybody can be doing beyond what you just mentioned. And in fact, I'll ask you to speak about these things, but we know from the research that what you're about to talk about, yes, is incredibly helpful in preventing the development of dementia, but can also be useful even if you have started down that path of developing dementia. So some of you, if you've come to any of the ADDF symposia in the past, may have heard about Dr. Mia Kivipelto, who is really has instigated studying some of the prevention features. But I know that you, Phyllis, also have a very close connection with Mia and some of the lifestyle interventions that she
we
has
female
talked about.
scientists need to hang together, don't we?
That's right. So I'd love to hear from you about how you, one, what these are, but then where you see these fitting into some of the early detection and the system preparedness role.
Sure, absolutely. So Mia Kivipelta is at the Karolinska Institute. Actually, she's friends of Bonnie, I just found out, which is fantastic. She did a study called the FINGER study, or the Finnish Geriatric Research Study. Finland's a wonderful place to do research because of the infrastructure they have there. And she learned that there are things that you and I can and should be doing today to modify our risk of getting any form of dementia. But also, these can improve your brain's resilience of basically staving off amyloid plaque. Now, let's be clear. If you have amyloid plaque, you're not going to blueberry your way out of it, okay? This is a real pathological neurological disorder, right? It's the reason you do need disease-modifying therapies that are going to remove plaque. But there are some things that you can do to make your brain more resilient, just like you make your body more resilient for other types of comorbidities. So let's run through those, right? First, Mediterranean diet. Pescatarian. I became a pescatarian over the pandemic. Been one of the best things I've ever done. And I don't miss steak at all, although I live in Indiana and my husband loves steak. So Mediterranean diet. Regular cardiovascular exercise. 30 minutes a day, if you can do it. Manage your blood pressure very tightly, below 120. Quit smoking. Alcohol in moderation. Social engagement, one of the most important things you can do. Cognitive engagement, right? Whether that's coming to events like this or that's still working or volunteering. And then here's the one I'm going to hit you with. Sleep. 7 to 8 hours a night. Not more, not less. 7 to 8 hours a night. And why is that? Sleep is the only time that the janitor, which is the microglia in your brain, run around and clean up this amyloid plaque. I do a lot of presentations to women's events, and I always say to a group of working women who are taking care of children, working full-time, potentially taking care of parents, I say sleep 7 to 8 hours a night, and they start laughing, right? And I'm like, no. Leave the dirty dishes in the sink and go to bed. And so those are the things that we all can and should be doing, and really should be starting to do that very early in life. So how does this fit in? Well, a lot of times doctors will say, well, why should I diagnose Alzheimer's disease? Did you know that in the United States of America, the doctor only discloses an Alzheimer's diagnosis 30% of the time? So the doctor's made an Alzheimer's diagnosis, but doesn't tell the patient or their family. Now, that's not because they're bad doctors. It's because they're not confident in the diagnosis. They don't know how to have the conversation. They don't want to talk about all the other things that the patient's going to ask about, medical advance directives and financial planning and all that kind of stuff. And they don't feel like there's something they can do about it, right? And doctors want to solve problems. Well, if we hand them these lifestyle changes, now they have something they can do. Because what a primary care physician wants to do is help their patients live happier, healthier, longer lives. And if you have an individual in your office who, let's say, is a diabetic, and you're giving them complicated diabetic guidance, but they have unrecognized cognitive impairment, probably not going to be able to follow your advice, right? So now we're giving them something to be able to talk to their patients about. So I think we should all be doing these things. I think we should be talking about our brain health. I think we should be talking about our brains with our families and our loved ones and our friends and our book clubs and our churches and in our communities. But I also think we should be talking about our brain health with our doctors, because our doctors will be more comfortable talking about it if we talk about it with them.
So with the doctor, the current community of healthcare that's available, what do you see as some of the biggest gaps, and how has this played out with the new Alzheimer's drugs that are coming onto the market?
Right. There are a lot of steps that have to happen to get a prescription of Leqembi today, and hopefully soon a prescription of donanemab. Every single one of those steps is an operational challenge. You have to get a cognitive assessment done. You have to then find out if you have the pathology that means your cognitive assessment is actually related to amyloid. You have to have an MRI to make sure that you don't have some sort of underlying brain hemorrhage that might make you more at risk for some of the side effects from the disease and the drugs. You have to, and by the way, that pathology is probably 2 steps. It's probably blood and a PET scan. And then you have to go to an infusion center to actually get the drug. So Leqembi is dosed twice a month with an infusion. Donanemab is dosed once a month with an infusion. And then often you may have to get follow-up PET scans to see, or MRIs to see both imaging, right? MRI will see if you have the safety and the side effects, and the PET scan for Amyvid will show whether if the plaque is reducing. So there's a whole lot of steps there that are operationally very challenging. Dr. Soren Matkey from USC took a look at the way our current system works. And if everyone who needed to go see a neurologist was kind of caught in the front end of that funnel, we would have a 52-month wait in this country to see a neurologist. I'm sorry, if I've just found out that I have a progressive neuropathological disease, I don't want to wait 52 months to see a neurologist, right? So we've got to clean up some of those things and use some of these technologies that ADDF has invested in, because we now have digital technologies that can do the cognitive assessment. So you don't actually have to have a doctor proctor it, right? You can do it with an Apple Pen on an iPad. It's actually better than when you're drawing the clock with a pencil. Some of you may have done that test. It's a lot better when you do it with an Apple Pen. It collects a lot more data. There's lots of digital cognitive tests that are now FDA cleared. Not paid for by Medicare, but FDA cleared. You also have blood tests now that are working their way through the regulatory process. So there's all sorts of things that we can do to make this system a little bit better and a lot better. What happens today, which makes me sad, having lived through this with my family. So my father was a retired commander in the Navy and an executive, and we had every resource available to us. And it still almost broke our family. And yet, all I could think of was, what does someone do when they're a single mom? And they're supporting, maybe their mother and their kids, and they're working multiple jobs, and they're trying to figure this out. Because what happens today, when you have a wait with a doctor, somebody calls Phyllis or Laura and says, they just told me it's a 9-month wait, and I call my friend, Dr. Brosh or Dr. Salloway, and say, hey, can you get my friend's mom in? And that's not a good way for the system to run, right? It shouldn't be about who you know, which is what jumps you to the front of the queue. And so we've got a lot of real systematic problems that we can fix. These are operational engineering problems. This is not as hard as discovering a drug. But we got to take the Lego pieces apart, and we got to put them back in a way that patients are going to run through the system with more efficiency, and the people who really need to get to the neurologist get there, and those who don't need to get to a neurologist, because they can take the blood test and the cognitive assessment and find out they're just fine, and they don't need to go to the neurologist, that we're not throwing them into the system.
So you've had the benefit of working with people who have been developing the drugs and hearing about the experiences of the patients who either were part of clinical trials or are now part of clinical care. Can you share some of what you've been hearing about those experiences?
Oh, yeah. Well, the first thing I don't ever want to hear again is my mom just got diagnosed and she wants to go in a clinical trial and they're telling me she's too late. I don't want to hear that ever again. Because that is the paternalism of our society and our system that's allowed that to happen. It took that person's choice away to participate in research, and for a researcher who knows how hard it is to recruit these studies, it's a travesty, right? Here's someone who wanted to participate and they couldn't, so I never want to hear that again. We're working and chipping away at that. But I think what's really fun to hear is I've never had someone say to me, I wish I'd joined that clinical trial later. Every single person has said, I'm so glad I did this. I wish I'd done it sooner. I'm getting wonderful care. They love their clinical trialists. Jim and Jerry Taylor, who are good friends of ours, have been relentless advocates about clinical trial participation and told their story. Jerry was in the Aduhelm Phase 1 study. And I think it actually kept her better longer because she was out telling her story and advocating for clinical trials. And when we did finally shut down the SOLA studies, the solanezumab studies, we had some patients that had been on that drug for over 6 years with monthly infusions, and they loved their infusion routine. They loved their infusion nurses. It was part of their life. It was part of their routine. They had personal relationships with these nurses, and they didn't want it to end. They felt like they were, they felt like they were part of the solution. They were fighting back against a disease that everyone had told them that there was nothing you could do, and they were actually raising their hands and saying, it might not help me, but it'll help my kids, And so they really had a lot of purpose there, but they also really enjoyed the relationship they had with the clinical trial site staff and the infusion nurses.
That's really inspiring to hear, especially as we look at how this might then transition into a clinical care, so in clinical practice. Some people may be thinking infusions. Oh, that does not sound like how I want to be taking medicine. I want a pill. Can you talk a little bit about what you think, one, what you've observed for these patients in clinical care, and where you think the future landscape may be moving?
One of the things that I'm surprised hasn't happened yet, remember, business background, right? Capital lid hat on here. I'm really surprised that someone hasn't come in and invested in this infusion space. You see what DaVita has done with dialysis and made this really positive customer experience. As people are getting now earlier and earlier in the disease to get these drugs, and we're now studying the drugs prior to cognitive symptoms, so what they call secondary prevention, which means I can see the plaque in the brain, but you don't have any symptoms yet. So these are cognitively normal individuals. All of the infusion capacity is sitting in hemophilia and oncology locations. No one wants to go get their infusions in a pediatric oncology ward, right? Especially if you're cognitively well. So I just see all this opportunity for investment where, I can see a situation where I go get my infusion while I'm getting a pedicure, right? Let's get this thing done. Like I gotta get a pedicure, I gotta get my infusion, let's get them done at the same time. And it just becomes part of or getting my hair cut, right, at a barber shop, right? So you get a shave while you're getting your infusion and you get your nails buffed and you're off and ready to go. And that's what we should be seeing, right? We should be seeing Alzheimer's disease as something that is not this mental image of someone who is in a nursing home in a corner in a wheelchair, but someone who is needing to get their nails done because they've got a ballroom dancing class that night. And that's where I think this will shift. It's one of the reasons why I'm so excited that ADDF has chosen to be one of the first Moonshot champions. So Startup Health, which is an organization that helps entrepreneurs get through that valley of death, has launched an Alzheimer's Moonshot and said, it took, 6,000 companies to get us to the moon? It's going to take that many companies to get us through Alzheimer's disease. And once again, ADDF has stepped up as one of the first champions to invest in helping entrepreneurs do startups and create new companies in this space of Alzheimer's disease. And so I just see a lot of opportunity. I come back to the very first thing you asked me. We're at the front of this innovation curve right now. That's around the science. That's around the therapies, the diagnostics, the care support, everything. I just am really excited about where we are in the field.
So it sounds like you're very hopeful for the field.
Oh, yeah.
Can you really give to the audience what you think the key takeaways are from our discussion?
Sleep 7 to 8 hours a night, not more, not less. You're here because you're a believer. I mean, to be honest, you're not the folks that we need to be talking to because you're already here. But you may be evangelists. In fact, you probably are. I would be willing to bet that you're sitting in a position of influence. I don't know what all those positions are, but you do. Maybe it's your time, maybe it's your treasure, maybe it's a connection you have with a local hospital or a health system. Go bang on the door. Ask them what they're doing. Are we going to continue to treat this disease like my grandparents were treated? Or are we going to actually take these clinically ready innovations in the science and make sure that people benefit from them now? And so, I guess my call to action would be, what position are you sitting in to take care of yourself, but also to use some sharp elbows and be a little irreverent and bang on some doors, because it's time that we say enough's enough. But I think it's easy to sell that right now because we actually do have these clinically ready innovations that are just not getting used.
Well, I certainly have enjoyed hearing about everything that you have to share with the audience. And now we're going to take some time and actually open it up
for questions?
For questions
oh, goody,
from the
that's
audience.
The fun part.
Now we have at least 2 microphones here, and so I'm going to ask people to raise their hands.
I heard this wasn't a shy group.
Yes.
I hope
so
not.
So let's start with
It's
the
much
question.
more fun.
Here.
It's much more fun.
I would like to ask, a lot of people don't want to know if they're candidates for it because they don't want to know. They think they'll never enjoy another day in their life because they know they're going to get it. What kind of progress have you really made that will make a difference in their lives as they get it so they understand, so maybe they'll want to take these tests?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, we hear that from doctors a lot, right? People don't want to know. We've done actually quite a few surveys, and you'd be surprised. There's a lot more people that want to know now that there's things that you can do. But here's what I would give you, just some numbers. The current medicines that are now available or soon to be available slow this disease by 30%, okay? If you take that drug for 18 months, 30% is 6 months. Doesn't sound like a lot. What if you take that drug for 3 years? It's a full year. What if you take it for 6 years? It's 2 years. And those could be 2 years that mean I walk my daughter down the aisle, or I get to spend time with my grandchild that's newly born, or maybe I'm there for my granddaughter's wedding. So it's a product of math, right? And what the finger study actually shows, the earlier you start in these lifestyle changes, the more slowing you potentially have, because now you have compounded benefit, right? I'm doing the lifestyle changes at the same time I'm taking the medicine if I have the amyloid plaque in my brain. And the studies that are going on right now, so the AHEAD 3-4-5 study and the Trailblazer 3 study, which are both these studies that look at people who have amyloid plaque in their brain but no symptoms, the goal is to remove the plaque and never have dementia. But you can't take the drug unless you've had the test. And so I think it's a matter of math, and I think it's a matter of people learning more that there are things that you can do.
What kind of a doctor do you go to? Because, it's very difficult to get doctor appointments.
Yeah, so here's what I would recommend. Oh yeah, the question was, what kind of doctor do I go to? Okay, so there are some specialist doctors. Richard Isaacson is down here, so if you haven't gone to see Richard Isaacson, go see Richard. But the other thing that I would do, go to a clinical trial site. Clinical trials aren't for everyone, both in terms of your choice in participating and also whether you're eligible. But those clinical trial sites will have access to all of these tests, and they'll help you think through what is, a potential opportunity for you. You can sometimes, you can get those tests then if you enroll in part of the screening protocol. There's so much research available too right now. There's drug studies, right? Clinical trial studies for a new medicine. But there's also these biomarker studies where basically you just raise your hand and say, I'll give you my blood. I'll do some PET scans. And I will give you all my information, and you get all the tests as part of the study, but there's not necessarily a medicine that's being studied. It's more of a biomarker study. There's one called BioHermes 2, which is hopefully to get kicked off here very soon. And so I find a clinical trial site nearby. If you don't know how to find those, you can go to ct.gov. You can go to Trial Match on the Alzheimer's website. You can go to Lilly Clinical Trial Guide, find a local clinical trial site, go talk to somebody there, because they'll have all the tests. They'll also have observational studies. They have tests for people that studies for cognitively impaired, cognitively normal, you name it. There's so much research out there right now that's not getting recruited. That's what I would do. Yeah. I'm too young right now. You have to usually be 55. To start engaging in the clinical trials, but I'll tell you what, when I turn 55, the first thing I'm going to do is go find a clinical trial site and volunteer to contribute. Why wouldn't I give them my blood? They can have it. If something I can do to make this better and I could get the information, yeah.
So we have another question over here.
You mentioned in terms of sleep 7 to 8 hours, but not more. I can understand why less would be not good. Why is more not good?
Yeah, so we don't know exactly why that is the case, but there is an confounding factor that when you find that people are sleeping more than 8 hours a night, there is potentially some other risk. Now, it could be something like, you're taking an Ambien or a benzo before bed, or Tylenol PM, anyone? Take Tylenol PM before bed? Bad idea. And so it's not giving you quality sleep. So I do recommend, I wear a Fitbit. I check my sleep quality every morning. And it's a really good tool to kind of see what your quality of sleep is. And it gives you lots of good coaching around sleep hygiene and things. So we don't know exactly why too much, but it probably is the confounding factor of somebody who's not getting up and moving and doing everything else they're supposed to be doing.
And another question.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this and your enthusiasm and hope in this area. My father passed away of Alzheimer's, and there wasn't any hope at the time. But you mentioned 2 drugs, and I didn't get the spelling of them, that are available, or are they still in testing phase?
Right.
If someone has the amyloids.
So the one that is approved right now is called Leqembi.
Can you spell them?
I sure can. Leqimbi. It is marketed by a company called Eisai. That is the one that is a twice-a-month infusion. The other drug we mentioned is donanemab, which that is the generic name, and it's Dona, or D-O-N-A. D-O-N-A-N, MAB, E-M-A-B. It is under FDA review right now, and I expect the company, that's the Lilly drug. I do not have insider information, I promise. But they have publicly said that end of Q1 is when they expect to launch something. And I've seen a lot of activity from my Lilly friends. So I think they're probably in label negotiations right now. But that is not the branded name. So wait for the announcements, and it will then tell you what the branded name is. The difference, the drugs work fairly similarly. Donanemab is only dosed once a month instead of twice a month.
Okay, we have a question in the back of the room.
How long? I think
Actually, repeat the question.
Yeah, the question was how long is the infusion? This is really kind of tricky. The doctors actually get paid a different amount depending on how long the infusion is. So there are some perverse incentives, but it's about 30 to 45 minutes process. You're in and out. You should be in and out in an hour.
Okay, and moving to the back.
Yes, thank you again for letting us know and reminding us that knowledge is power, and I think that's going to be key with the younger generation, and I think ADDF is doing a great job with that, and hopefully get more people involved at a younger age. So I have 2 questions. One is cost. I know diagnosis and awareness, but what about the cost if you're doing all this transfusion and if you're not part of a trial? And then the other one is sleep again. If you cannot sleep and you say no Ambien, no Tylenol PM, no Benadryl, no the CBD, whatever the counter, is it better to take something and sleep or just be up all night?
Let's be clear. My doctoral degree is in public health. I'm not a medical doctor. So I probably couldn't comment necessarily on is it better to take something or not. I will say on the sleep question, my husband and I arm wrestle over this a lot because he's an Ambien taker. But he also watches television to fall asleep. Number 1 no-no. And so there's a whole bunch of sleep hygiene things that you could do that I would try before I looked at medicine, right? So you can Google this: cold, dark room, nothing backlit for an hour before bedtime. Alcohol really screws up your sleep cycle. In fact, I can tell on my Fitbit when I've had 1 glass of wine. I can see it in my sleep rhythms. The other thing is meditate before bed. So I think there's some things you can do that are really good sleep hygiene. I would do that before I took something. If you want to take something, then I think it's a question for your doctor. To the question about cost, so Leqembi is priced at $26,000 a year, I think, right? $26,000 a year. It is Medicare covered if you sign up for the registry, which basically means that you'll continue to provide your data so they can track safety longitudinally of the medicine. But there's still a big donut hole there, right? You still have a big deductible, and that doesn't account for the deductibles for the PET scans, the MRIs, the blood tests are not paid for. The digital cognitive assessments are not paid for. So this is one of the things that we are going to have to do a lot of advocacy with Medicare. I think it's ageism 101 that we're not paying for these meds. It's been 35 years since we've had a new Alzheimer's drug. I think it's quite appropriate for us to tell people with this disease that we should be paying for it. Luckily, Medicare Advantage covers a little bit more than straight up Medicare, but the coverage is not enough. And it will actually play into the health equity divide too, for sure.
I think we have another question there.
Is the answer here simply just removing amyloid plaque? Or are there other therapies in the work that go beyond additional monoclonal antibodies?
Let me start the answer, and then actually it's probably a better answer for Laura. Simply, we don't, for Alzheimer's pathology, which is the amyloid and the tau, we don't know if it's simply the answer of removing the plaque. That's what these studies are looking at, that are looking at secondary prevention, because they're going to say so basically, if you've heard about the disease cascade, amyloid comes first, then, which is outside the cells, then tau tangles come next, which are inside the cells, and then neuroinflammation happens next, that's where the neuronal degradation and the synapses and everything kind of breaks down. So the hypothesis is if you can catch it early enough and you get rid of the amyloid, you kind of take away the trigger of those downstream things. But they're still studying it in people that are cognitively normal, so we just don't know the answer yet. But in terms of other mechanisms, the answer is there's a fantastic amount of new mechanisms, and that's what actually ADDF spends most of their time on now.
Yes, so ADDF is very interested in understanding what actually contributes to the development both of the pathology but also of the symptoms. Because we know that just because you have amyloid in the brain does not mean that you will necessarily go on to develop the cognitive symptoms. And so at ADDF, we actually look at the fact that aging is the number one risk factor for the development of Alzheimer's disease. And we recognize that there are many other components, what we call the biology of aging, that we think will be very, very important to be able to then develop additional drugs that we can use in combination in a precision medicine approach, using biomarkers for these other mechanisms to then in the future combine these and look for what we call synergistic effects. So, for example, Phyllis mentioned neuroinflammation. We know that that is an aging-related risk. And so if we can develop drugs, and we are currently funding drug trials focused on drugs targeting neuroinflammation, perhaps with anti-amyloid, anti-tau drugs, then we can go beyond just slowing cognitive decline by 30%. Perhaps it'll be 60%. Perhaps it'll be 100%, so that we can ultimately prevent and cure Alzheimer's disease. So yes, it is absolutely essential that we look to the future for these additional types of drugs.
Yeah, I mean, cancer isn't cured with one drug, right? But you had to have the first one to help you understand the next one. And one of the things that people don't always realize is we kind of use Alzheimer's and dementia as interchangeable words, but they're not the same thing. When you sneeze and you need to blow your nose, you grab a Kleenex. No, you don't. You grab a tissue, right? Kleenex happens to be the brand of that tissue, right? So Alzheimer's disease is about, they think about 60 to 70% of the causes of dementia. But there's all these other things, right? So the beauty of having that first hit, right? We have a first hit in a game, we got on first base in a game that nobody's gotten a hit before, right? With these monoclonal antibodies. But they're not the end of the game. There's all sorts of other things that we're going to understand, including that there's probably different types of diseases that we need to treat. But that's why we are such advocates of figuring out what is causing the symptoms. You don't go to a doctor with a symptom like pain, for example, and he just gives you a pain med and says, oh, go on, and you don't figure out what's going on with, you have the MRI on your back, or you have the x-ray, or you figure out what's causing the pain. And we should be doing that same thing with cognitive impairment.
I just had a follow-up.
Yeah.
It was on the the diagnostics on the blood test, what sort of markers are you actually using? Because, in cancer, you would look for DNA fragments or something like that.
Sure. So, and Laura may actually be a better person to answer this one scientifically too. But basically, they're looking for two types of markers. One is actually the fragments of amyloid. So, fun little science lesson. We all have amyloid precursor protein running through our bodies all the time. So if you think about like a pearl necklace, like what Laura has on, that's kind of, a chain, how the pearls have knots in it, so that the pearls, these are peptides, right? And what happens is, this is amyloid precursor protein. We all have it in our bodies. You have a beta cleavage that comes in and cuts off part of it, and the body goes and uses that. And you have gamma cleavage, and it comes and uses that. And it's left with this sticky portion in the middle that's called A beta 40 or 42, right? So that's 40 or 42 of those little peptides, those pearls. This is a sticky, I call it the chicken wing, right? Nobody should be eating chicken wings, right? Chicken wings are the byproduct that we used to throw away until someone said, hey, maybe we should cook these, right? So anyway, this 40 to 42 are the chicken wings, right? It's this sticky, gross stuff. You and I, as our bodies, this circulating, our body's clearing it as fast as like a bathtub drain. The drain is running as fast as the faucet is. And so you're just clearing it. As you get older, that drain stops clearing it as fast. And what happens is the water starts rising, because those fragments, those 40 to 42 fragments, are filling up the bathtub faster than your body's clearing it. And they're really sticky, and they stick together, and they cause this clumpy plaque. But they can also be seen in the blood. They can also be seen in the cerebral spinal fluid. So the first thing that they're looking for is, are these fragments there, this A beta 42 to 40, these markers? There's another marker out there which is called p-tau, or phosphorylated tau, which is a marker of the tau portion, which can also be used to look at amyloid. So I don't know if that's maybe more science than you guys want, but I think it's really important to know that this is stuff that's floating in all of our bodies. And basically the drain's just slowing down, and so the goal is to create some drugs that are going to help those things, that drain, unclog that drain a bit. Does that help?
So I think we have time for one more question. Why don't we go to the front of the room?
Wouldn't mind talking to the microphones on the back.
Okay. Regarding sleep, how do you feel about naps?
So the data is actually that naps are fine. Once again, 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep is the goal. I probably wouldn't take 2 and 3 hour naps.
No.
But yeah, naps are not necessarily bad. And if they're part of your way of collecting that quality sleep, you just need to be careful that they're not taking away from the other things that you should be doing for your body.
Okay, thank you.
And
I love a good nap.
Yes. And I'm going to say we are going to have one more question, but I will also say that both Phyllis and I will be staying here and happy after the conclusion of the event to answer any questions that others have. So, Michelle, let's go there.
Well, thank you. So I have a question, too, actually. Since your father had Alzheimer's, have you done genetic testing looking for the APOE4?
Yeah.
And so you have?
No, I have actually. Ask your second question and I'll
And the other one is, if you were homozygous with the APOE4, would you immediately run for a PET scan and the blood test?
Yeah, great questions. So I have not done the APOE4 testing. So the question here is related to a genetic risk factor called APOE4, APOE, okay? You either have a 3 or a 4. You get 2 copies, one from your mom, one from your dad. So you have 2 3s, you have 2 4s, you have a 3 and a 4. If you have 2 4s, which means you're a homozygote, then you have about a 19% increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. Basically what's happening there is your body's creating more of this amyloid precursor protein. Your faucet is running hotter, right? By the way, this happens to be the same thing that happens in Down syndrome. So I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but people with Down syndrome all will get Alzheimer's disease over the age of 50 because they have this faucet that runs hot because APP is made on that trisomy that they 21 that they have a third copy of. So I have not gotten ApoE4 tested. I probably should. Honestly, the real reason I haven't so far is because I'm trying to do everything anyway, right? So I'm trying to do everything I would do if I had gotten the testing. In terms of getting the amyloid test, I'm a little young, so I'm 51. So I'm a little young to get it. I won't have any problem getting it. But once again, right now, I'm actually doing the things that I would be doing if I was ApoE4 homozygote or if I had amyloid in my brain. I'm doing all those things to the best I have ability. I do have glasses of wine, and it does impact my sleep. But the other thing that's really interesting about the genetic testing, which is something that's really important to consider, when you get an amyloid test, you find out about yourself. When you get an ApoE4 test or an ApoE test, you find out about your family. So you have to think you're getting information that's relevant to your children at that point as well. So my boys are 21 and 17. So I want to think long and hard about my genetic testing too, because when I get that information, it's going to be information that impacts them as well. So I think that's something that you have to think about when you do genetic testing. There's no reason at this point I haven't done it. I just need to call 23andMe and do it. There is a study, if you are an ApoE4 homozygote, there is a study right now specifically going on by a company called Alzheimer, which is a small molecule that's looking specifically at a product for ApoE4.
And Phyllis, when you say small molecule, what does that mean for
pill.
people?
Right, so infusions are large molecules. Basically they're proteins that have to be injected into your body because if you swallowed them, your body would digest it just like it was, any other protein. So Alzheon, Alzheon, is running a study for ApoE4 homozygotes with a new oral medication. And that's really important because the risks associated with the molecules today, lecanemab and donanemab, that ARIA risk or the hemorrhage risk is increased in people with 1 or 2 copies of ApoE4 or ApoE. So it's real important that we have some alternatives for people who are homozygotes.
Yeah. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up. I want to thank everybody for their time.
Yeah.
I want to thank those who brought us here, the Society for Arts, Tom and Heidi for helping to shepherd us here. So thank you again, and Phyllis and I
will stay around.
We'll come down off the stage so that we can have a chance to talk with you.